This is a Film Stories original podcast. Welcome to the Xcast. The truth is in here. I'm your host, Russ Hugo, and welcome back to the I Want to Believe Minute, where we unpick the second X-Files movie 1 minute at a time. So today, helping me to explore minute 60, running from approximately 59 to 59:59, is once again Jim Beard. Welcome back, Jim.
I am glad to be back, and excited to be that I get this scene that we're going to talk about.
Well, then I'll let you kick us off. What are your thoughts?
I was really pleased. I watched the movie. I wasn't paying attention to what my particular minutes were that I was going to talk about. And then when I went back just a little bit before recording this to rewatch those minutes and zero in on them, I couldn't believe my luck because honestly, this is, if not my most favorite scene in the movie, it's one of my most favorite scenes in the movie. I've always been a Scully fan and really love Gillian Anderson, and I think she does a great job in this, and I think the actor who plays Father Joe does a great job in this. And I think that there's a lot being said in between, the dialogue here. And I never imagined I would enjoy such a scene where Scully is that uncomfortable in a scene.
Yeah, speaking of the uncomfortableness, that's one of my notes there is when she first is outside the door, the breathing is a really nice touch. There's a subtlety to her performances in general, but the fact that the posture, the hair, just this mixture of fatigue or almost self-loathing and disgust of external and internal is really quite nice. And the way the environment and the space plays off on this, I mean, it's a little over the top in how yellow everything is, that sickly, grotesque yellow, in the sense that it feels warm, but in a gross way, in a really vile way. And then they opens the door, you see the cold blue outside. Scully's dressed with a similar beigeish warm yellow, but with a little bit of blue dress shirt poking in. Like, they're really playing with the colors and then the body language. And then also just even Father Joe's, we'll get into this, his posturing and the way that he positions himself at the beginning of the interaction and then how the interaction ends, where he's blocking the doorway. He's forcing her to sit down. There's an angle, a low angle up to him initially, and then how slowly throughout the conversation, even though Scully doesn't necessarily get the upper hand dialogue-wise, in the physicality, Father Joe lowers. And it's an interesting transition, I think, through this scene.
One of the things that I really love is the way it kicks off, that when he opens the door and sees her, that shot, to me, set the tone as far as she's going to be very vulnerable here, that she's standing off, kind of a little off to one side, and just kind of not, haughty, not kind of shrinking either, but just kind of almost, well, it's funny, kind of a little bit of in a humble way too, because she's swallowing some pride in their previous encounter to come to him because she really needs to know something. I really like the back and forth, and I also like the fact that Father Joe, now his character gets much more fleshed out here. I wasn't even sure that I really kind of liked his character before this scene, and I like it because he's got some things to say to her, and he's not really going to, chomp down on it and not let it out. I love it when he says, because you loathe me, He's not mincing words with her. But I like it because she's trying to be restrained, but also kind of be humble in a way, as if she's thinking about how am I going to play this? I need to know something from him. What's going to be the way? Like she already knows that how he feels about her, and he knows how she feels about him. Again, it's another scene where I wouldn't have guessed where it was going to go once it begins.
Yeah, and it's interesting in hindsight to also look at repetitions in the X-Files that you're on for, at this time, 9 seasons and then 2 feature films. You're going to repeat yourself, and it obviously did multiple times throughout the show, and that's forgivable. It's not a criticism, but it's interesting sometimes how they reapproach things and where characters are at. And going back to season 1's Beyond the Sea, one of my favorite episodes, which has a very similar plot line, in that not only is there a psychic related to some degree of serial killing happening, but that Scully's relationship with the psychic throughout the episode is her trying to wrestle with the idea of if she can make a deal with the devil to get an answer based on some proposition. In Beyond the Sea, with the message from her father, in this one about how to handle the question of the surgery with the child, and the fact that they're able to reapproach it, I think, successfully. This is a very different way. The antagonism between the two characters is very different. The relationship between Mulder and the psychic in Beyond the Sea and with Father Joe here are completely different. And overall, it does play out in an interesting way, particularly in that it doesn't come to a very clear resolution at the end of the scene. And we'll get to that in our next minute. That we're still left with, throughout the entire film, ambiguity. But even right here, you think we could reach some sort of catharsis in understanding or agreement, but instead it serves well to, how do you say, position the characters for further conflict, which is
yeah
fun.
That's a good way to put it. Another thing that happened to me in this scene, I had heard that or read somewhere that Gillian Anderson struggled a bit when they started filming, that she felt that she had to sort of relearn the character of Scully. I kind of experienced that I was sort of relearning the character. And the one thing that this scene reminded me of was that she, as Father Joe says, is a person of faith. And I remember that washing over me, going like, wait a minute, is that right? Because that doesn't, seem like her. And then it reminded me that, yes, that is, that was a part of the character. So, again, this was way up there on my favorite scenes of the movie.
One thing I'd like to get your take on, since we're here, and when these minutes are, what did you say, allotted or divided for the film, the XCast team assigns a quick, few word synopsis of that minute. Sometimes it's a phrase from the film, or the character says. Sometimes it's just a rough description, like these two characters. For this one, they assigned the phrase, "a vision if I ever had one." And I think that's something I'd like to get your take on, to think about. There's obviously a clear meaning to it in the sense, okay, it's a play on the idea of a psychic vision. But what I'm interested in getting at, particularly you as a writer, is it's more of how the words are delivered throughout, how it's being characterized, and that it's not just that Father Joe, to me, as a watcher, that he's just saying it flippantly. There is a teasing, but a hostile teasing and challenging throughout. It's a balance. It's almost as if a mocking flirtation, which makes it even more uncomfortable. But I'm not sure how to summarize it. So I'm curious what you
just hit
think.
upon the word that I was going to use. It's very disconcerting when he says that. On the surface, those words, you could say it's flirtatious. And that seems really strange. So it kind of throws you off when he says that. But you're right, because it is almost sort of a challenging or mocking thing, but it also seems really wrong because, I mean, he's being called Father Joe. He's not a priest anymore, but he was. So, like, why would he be like that in a way? You have to kind of ask yourself, is there any chance at all that he's like, I don't know, he's attracted to her, which, would also be odd. I really liked it as an introductory line of dialogue because it does put you on weird ground, because you're kind of forced to, try to interpret that and how that will lead into the discussion that they're going to have.
And speaking of that, we're about to wrap up this first half of the discussion. Is there anything else about this first half that you'd like to talk about before we head to the next minute?
No, other than I wish there were more scenes like this in this movie. This is, to me, this is showing that this is Scully's movie. I don't feel like it's Mulder's movie really at all. This is really her movie, and her story about the hospital and the child and everything is now starting to come into the rest of the movie and really start to kind of mesh in a way.
It's definitely Scully's movie. It starts with her. I mean, she's the first main character, and it ends with her. And no, I agree. I mean, her arc is the most interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, with that, we'll be back to cover minute 61 very soon. But until then, always remember, trust no one.